Hello, I'm Farin Azrali, and I'm thrilled to be here with a dear colleague and full-time yoga and meditation teacher and a counselor in private practice, Lidija Martinovic Rekert. She is a dear friend and a colleague who I've known for several years, and I'm really excited to be talking a little bit about the work that you're doing now and the background that you bring from all of the work that you've done to what you're offering. Lidija, tell us a little bit about your roots and your ancestral lineage.
Wow, my ancestral roots. Well, I haven't even thought about that until just recently, to be honest, when I was starting to acknowledge the ancestral roots of the land that we are standing and sitting and playing and working, of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and I just felt such need to understand not just where my recent ancestry goes, which is a lot of war trauma and um, in ex-Yugoslavia and whatever it is that we experience in our family, our load of trauma. But it was more of what happens in the past. Where is this little country that I'm coming from? And it's interesting that it's a tribal country, and my tribe is Baize. So if I would be traveling in a public transportation, somebody would not ask me, where are you from? But it would say, what is your tribe? And if I say, what is my last name? They would know exactly what my family is and where they live and all of it. It was last year and during the COVID when I traveled to my country for medical reasons. We were walking on the beach, and my dad spotted a dead turtle, a huge dead turtle that the diameter was about 2 meters. And we came there and cleaned that space around the turtle, and then found these beautiful eyes and contemplated on it and meditated on it. And then I realized, wow, I am coming from a turtle island, and this is my ancestral turtle.
Mm. And how important do you think it is to connect with our ancestral roots in terms of modern day society and modern day life and acknowledgement of the land that we live on that has been inhabited by indigenous people for millennia before us?
I think it's the sense of knowing where our bloodline is and connecting to it. And when it comes to the practices like spiritual practices or even work practices or my counseling practices, I feel that this what I'm saying, ownership of it, that I'm embodying more and more, that wilderness of this wild Balkan women and the matriarch. I was brought up with my grandmothers, and when the grandmothers enters the room, everybody will be quiet and listening to her. She was the matriarch and had 9 granddaughters. So I don't know how it is for others, but for me to feel that connectedness with the feminine lineage, with what I was brought in and the suffering that was brought in with me, I feel I can work here and live here in a more wholesome way, and also honor this land and the ancestors and learn the way how we can live here and the protocols that we can live here and the way that we consume that can come from the deep sense of respect and love and action.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned several times the trauma of coming from a country that's been at war, and there's been so much trauma here in North America, so much collective traumas, and there's so much trauma has informed even the yoga world. Tell us a little bit about your lived experience in trauma and what it means to heal trauma and the somatic aspects of healing trauma.
Um, and again, I have to say that I'm only speaking from my little understanding of it. Of course, I cannot even imagine or be close to imagine traumas of people that are affected by colonization or racism or living in cults or being a part of the, let's say, a network of sexual abuse and all of this. Um, so in that sense, my trauma is seem mm, unique to me. Um, Although my family, my mother was a physician and my father was a scientist, robotic scientist, both of them were really on a very high achievement level, but they brought their own trauma. My mother lineage had a deep sexual trauma and incest, so that was something that was brought up to me. I was sexually abused by my stepfather, including my sister, also abused by uh, our grandfather. So this level of trauma is just even not comprehensible for somebody who hasn't actually gone through it. And the more I was speaking about this, the more I'm realizing that it's so pervasive in an everyday society. We're just scratching the surface when we start to talk about the trauma within the families, and particularly the sexual trauma. So me movement is maybe just the beginning of it on the scale of institutions. But as I said, we haven't even scratched when it comes to the families and the subtlety of this. Yeah, my grandmother, lost her husband when she was 30, and she left with 3 kids in the wilderness. So I certainly was brought up with that trauma of her. Every time she would make lunch for me, she would have these grieving songs. Like in Montenegro, we sing as we grieve. We have a very strong traditions around death and dying, which I like to cultivate while I'm here. Um, uh, and she would be just weeping while she was making my lunch. So my lunches were very frequently moisturized by her tears. So how am I coming into this world with that, and how the trauma informs me? I would say I don't think I would ever imagine myself being fixed or, like it, or put together or healed in any way. I don't think the trauma is about that. The more I'm learning about it, the more I see that trauma informs me of who I am. It actually makes me being more connected in my brokenness. And this is the gift of it. So it's not my work then informs that. So my work is not so much about the transcending and getting rid of the trauma. It's actually about seeing the trauma as a resource that can give us so much confidence, but also inform us of what we need at the moment when we are deeply regressing in it.
I thought that was really poetic in how you put that. And I know, you have so much background in somatic work, both as a yoga instructor and also in the work that you've done in somatic movement. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about the impact that movement and embodiment, how that overlays with doing work as it relates to reconciling with our past experiences and traumas.
Hmm. It's a complex question, but also I would like to kind of say historically how it weaved, because it makes more sense to me, because my mind is not linear in that way. Um, I'm coming from a Slavic tradition, and in our language, Slavic language, we have a lot of Sanskrit. So the Sanskrit is very familiar. When I've learned about yoga and Buddhism from my older sister, Nina, who was a brilliant thinker and a philosopher and a philanthropist. Due to all the trauma, she committed suicide when I was 24. She was 28. But before that, she taught me about the yoga and introduced me to a Buddhism, in fact, into a Vajrayana Buddhism. So this was my coming into Vancouver, and my understanding about the healing of the body and the somatic practices and yogic practices actually are more intertwined with this spiritual context. I would quote today's contemporary embryologist, Jaap van der Wal, who would say that if we would really know spirituality, we would actually go and study embryology. So embryogenesis, which means the formation of our body from the moment of conception, implantation, all through the phases of it until the 8 weeks, it's actually a spiritual process. So whatever happens there in the movement of the fluids while the embryo was forming, it's a spiritual process. So when I work somatically with people, I am not working, and I don't know why. For some reason, the modern society is very much obsessed with brain and nervous system. So before the nervous system was there, before the brain was there, there were circulatory systems and the systems in the body. Well, first of all, the cellular system um, and the fluid system, energy system, that was forming the embryo. What was fascinating for me researching on the formation of the movement and formation of our body is that the heart, the pulsation, the primitive pulsation of the heart started what will be above our head. That's where the primitive heart was starting. The first pulsing, the first, that they say, rudimentary nervous system is actually heart. It's not brain. And then as the embryo was having this flexion and folding, then the heart was formed within the cavity and the brain was starting to grow right from the beginning, bowing into the heart. And our lips literally kissing the heart right from the beginning. So in the traditions of the mysticisms like Rumi that I know you can relate to, no wonder that that's the essence of it. Like right from the beginning, you have that love affair. So anyways, that's just a long answer to your question. How the somatic is embedded in and what is the movement. So when I teach the movements, the body, let's say somebody comes and they feel broken, they have their hip broken or anything that they need help with, I would not focus on the problem. I would more focus on what osteopathy calls the health of the body, which I will focus on the primary respiration, which would be the prana or the life force or the energy. And I would be walking this person through the embryological stages and through the, which actually, interestingly enough, our own ontogenesis, which is the development as a human species, actually coincide with the phylogenetics, which is the evolution of the species. So when you look at the embryo, at some points we do look like a seahorse. At some point we do look like a starfish. So the center of our body is in the umbilical area. So we have 6 limbs. And so on. So we move through these stages of developmental movement all up until when we're born, and then later on when we start to crawl and creep and then walk. So when I work with somebody, I really go back into this developmental stages and cellular developments, and then we slowly build our ways through, so that the movement is not volitional, it's not willful, it's not muscular. The muscles only came later. It's more based on finding the movement that it's already there, because there is motility and motion everywhere in the body already. And I give a big gratitude to one of my teacher, Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen, who is a founder of Body Mind Centering, and whom I learn a lot of this ground, as well as my friend and teacher, Daniela Mikula, who was teaching for my training. She's a somatic practitioner, so I can't hold myself an expert because I don't have any diploma in this world, but it's definitely highly informed with how I approach movement.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to speak a little bit more about primary breathing or primary respiration and the importance of starting from there rather than volition or muscular contraction?
That's so important, Farah, and I know you and I are on the same court with that when it comes to the prana and the energies. And again, if I say anything, I would like to come with start from the embryo, because in the embryo we weren't breathing through our lungs, right? But we were breathing. Our cells were breathing. They were moving, so that first breath, as they call it in osteopathy, and I finished the training called biodynamic craniosacral therapy. So we speak a lot about that biodynamic field, which is the field around. And if you look at the embryo, the amniotic sac where the embryo was floating all 9 months, is the home of that primary breath. And it's interesting that as embryo, we brought everything with ourselves, whoever we are. Like we can say, we formed ourselves. Our cells were coming, our amniotic sac was coming from ourselves, our yolk sac was coming from ourselves, our umbilical cord was coming from ourselves. So only the placenta was, the cells of placenta were formed partly from the mother's cells and partly from our cells. So it's a translator so that our blood can connect with the blood of the mother. That's how we can have different bloods, type bloods. So it's very interesting to think about that, isn't it?
It's
We brought
fascinating.
everything. It's fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating.
So you can say you brought your little knapsack, you brought your little sleeping bag, you brought your little yolk sack. So you were nibbling on your own yolk sac before you could even form the umbilical cord to reach to the mother. So maybe it was the 5th week or so of the embryo. Maybe your mother hardly even knew that she was pregnant, but there you are, the life force of these fluids that were moving. And it's all fluids. You can't see anything formed in a calcified way up until later. I think the first calcified bones were the clavicles, as far as I heard. So we were all forming that ourselves. So which makes me think, even before we connect to and to the space of the other, that there is something that brought us into this space that we are also whole, and we have that quality of wholeness just in ourselves. Or you can say the direct contact with this mystery. Call it God or call it universe or the deities, whatever it is, but we have that within ourselves. So my teacher Bonnie would say, how come we don't hear the universe in ourselves? And how come we don't hear it? And she would say, because we never didn't hear it. It was part of us. It's a part of our formation. It's a part of us putting us together. So this first breath that you can say, the primary respiration, in osteopathy, they call it the breath of life. They also call it health of the body. And they also call it love, is there. And so when in the process of healing, or maybe my own personal practices, when I tune in and working on the pranayam, one of the first ways that I'm doing it is to find the fluids of this primary respiration. And it's not so much in my body. It's more if I focus from the skin into the outside, that amniotic space, that aura or biomorphic field, that has a sense of inspiration. So it's expanding, and also has the sense of expiration or condensing. So that quality is there. And if I'm tuning into that subtle rhythm, or teaching my students and clients to tune into those subtle rhythms, we're connecting to the health of the body. And then as the founder of osteopathy, A.T. Still said, everybody can find a disease. You don't need to be an expert to know where to find a disease, but to find the health of the body, that's the goal of the practitioner.
It's been so fascinating to hear you speak, and I sense such a passion for this work that has been such a passion of yours for so many years. I'm so
10
curious.
years now.
20, wow. I'm so curious, how does Buddhism inform your practice and the work that you do with clients? And where does that come in?
Well, as you know, as a Dharma practitioner, that the Buddhism, it's not, for me, it's not a religion. In fact, it was very curious for me to come from the socialist country where I grew up, which means that when I actually accidentally took a Bible from a friend of mine in a grade 1 or 2, brought it home. My stepfather almost wanted to beat me up. Later on at university, I had a Bible because I was curious about reading what is in the Bible. And my uncle wanted to kick me out of the house. So imagine that perception. And then I'm coming here into North America where everybody's spoon fed with some form of religion and spirituality that I couldn't understand. I was just totally blown away by it, and actually really realized how this organized religion has created more of a damage, particularly as we speak to the spirituality of indigenous peoples, or I cannot even imagine. But this is what I'm noticing even now in North America, is just this, and I'm going to use the word, this sickness of the colonially tainted religion. That's for me not a Buddhism. The Buddhism is a science of the mind, and it's the big part of the Buddhism is that it's related to the body. The body is inseparable part of the Buddhism. And as you know, in the Buddhism, you have to study, you have to practice, and you have to contemplate, and you have to meditate, and you have to debate. These are all very important part of the Buddhist practices. So I continue doing that. And often when you hear us, me and my daughter and my son-in-law sitting on a dinner table, there is a lot of passionate conversation and debating about the spirituality or anything. And it's a very important part of our growth, not just our mutual growth. So that's where the Buddhism, that's how the Buddhism, that's how I started to practice Buddhism, and still continue learning. In the beginning, I was studying with the Theravadan school, which is the school of elders, and it's more the one present through Southeast Asia. And that's the practice that really brings the awareness and the practice of doing the meditation and very strict retreats. So I would go on the very long retreats and work on meditation. But meditation is also not for everybody. I see a lot of my clients who could actually be the trauma can come up more on the surface when there is a meditation present, or focusing on the body, or focusing on the breath. So I mean, 83,000 teachings. There's so many to incorporate in what I see Buddhist teaching is. But in very simple way, I could say just even a story of the Buddha himself tells pretty much what is happening in all of us. So we were, as just he was born in a prince in India, and his father trying to protect him and not let him see that there is anything bad in the world, up until one day he realized that he actually saw, I think, sick person, isn't it? You know the
That's
story?
right. Yeah.
And then he said, wow, so there is something different, a whole other world that I have no idea. And then he started to explore the world, and then seeing the old age, sickness and death. So in some way, what's happening in this little story, it's also a metaphor, the symbolism of what is happening with us, that we are swimming in our privilege and the self kind of clustered identities just by default, until we realize that this life is very fragile, and we're going to get sick, or anybody around us will get sick. The ones that we love would get sick, and be old and die. But that these moments of connecting with these three truths, we're starting to wake up our own ability to live this life fully. So my goal is to live the life fully, and to live and die fearlessly. And it's what the Buddhism teaches and taught, especially when it comes into the Mahayana Buddhism and the Vajrayana Buddhism of Tibetan practices that I continue to study with, that it's not just the individual salvation, you may say, or individual practices about me liberating myself. But as long as there is somebody in my environment or in my own consciousness that it's not free, my commitment is to come back. So when I took the Bodhisattva vows, that's what it means that as long as there is anybody there, I'll be there, because the other is just a reflection of myself.
Now, we've touched upon a theme that I think integrates many of the different things you've been talking about, and that is the aspect of grief and dying. And in Buddhism, you know, dying fearlessly, you mentioned. What inspires you to, or what gives you, what are the practices that are really a map for you in understanding how to die fearlessly and to live fearlessly?
Well, kids can teach us a lot about that, which is just really being in a moment to moment and just feeling the wonders of life. As far as I'm concerned, where we live on this amazing earth that has created with all this level of biodiversity, even though it's seemingly withering right now, it's really, we can only walk around with singing hallelujah, even with all the pain and suffering, because this is where we live. But when it comes to, we forget about that. We just got caught up with our ideas of what we think it's important. Or lately, what I'm noticing this happening in North America is this wave of self-improvement, of self-betterment, or all this kind of cluster that we put around ourselves. The modern philosopher, Korean and German philosopher Byung-Chul Han, talks about that a lot in A Burnout Society. And he actually says that we are in a risk of losing love. My teacher, Andrew Feldmer, also says that we are in a risk of losing language. So we are in a very precarious time when each and every one of us needs to be on that life force so fearlessly and fight. And I'm going to use the word fight because fight for it for ourselves, fight for it for our Indigenous friends, fight for our Black people of color, fight for our society to bring that love back and that language that makes sense back. And one of my biggest passion of it is dying and death and dying. I'm coming from the culture where we were practicing a vigil. So we're staying with the body for 3 days after death. We have weeping songs that are coming. One is coming, we're calling it yelling, yelling that comes from a man. So when the person comes, then the man comes in and he yells and screams. And then after that, the woman comes in and she continues with the weeping songs. And these weeping songs are, you actually pay these people to come in under your funeral so that you can extract the grief from the heart of the family. And that grief, that rawness of that grief and sadness, and which is, grief is more than just a sadness. It's the complexity. I don't think it's even emotion. It's just this ways that we connect with the depth of the tragedy of the fact that we live here so little, such a little flicker of time, and then we're just gone. Is where the fertile ground is of the life. So my biggest goal is, one of my biggest goal is to actually bring death home. So I'm belonging in the Shambhala Center, where I'm practicing with my fellow practitioners. We're forming a group called the Art of Dying, and we're actually working more on that kind of organizational level of how can we, with all the baby boomers, we're going to have a lot of death now happening, and we're not prepared, just as we were not prepared for this pandemic. We're not prepared of how to take care of our elders. We're just not simply prepared. So how to be ahead and prepare and not give this preciousness of being present with the body, wash the body, stay with the body, learn from the body, even after death, not just during this dying processes, is something that we want to bring home. So we don't want to just land it into the funeral homes that we know are based on this capitalist organizations, that they're just there to make money. And it's possible. I lost my husband in 2012, and we did this ceremony of keeping the body back at home. And I washed the body and being present with the body, and then put the coffin in the living room. And we opened the door so people can come in and meditate in the silence with the body. Now, to link this with what we were talking about, the primary respiration, Farah, is that according to the osteopathy, as well as according to Tibetan Buddhism, who studied a lot about the states of the consciousness around and after death, both of them, so we're talking science and spirituality that has invested a lot in understanding what's happening after death, agree on one thing, is that when the life force ends, it's not like you're going to turn the electricity or maybe a water pipe, because we're more water. You can't just say, I'm turning a water pipe off and then that's it. There is still water going through the pipe. And not only through the pipe of the physical body, but this primary respiration, it's still present. And when the osteopath worked, and my osteopath, Suzanne Pinot, worked with Winston, with my husband, and she says that the 3 days, his life force is actually stronger during the time of death. And in the 3 days after death, of course, withering away, but first day stronger, and then lesser and lesser and lesser, you can feel it, that it encompasses the entire room. So that means that this subtle mind, which is not our brain mind. Our brain mind is, I call it kindergarten mind. It's a very little of what we have with our frontal cortex that we can understand. But the big mind, in yoga we talk about the shunya, the shushumna, this quality of the that looks apparently empty, but where all the nadis and the channels dissolve into. And this dissolution practices are very important in Tibetan Buddhism. Is like, this is still alive, and in fact, actually, this is the body of wisdom. So if this stays for 3 days, and if we want to just have our dead people shuffled into some kind of a morgue, into a freezer, and just completely disconnect from them, we're losing on it. Because in my tradition, we are learning from the death. The death is like a rite of passage, not just for the person that is dying, but also for us who are staying alive. So when my husband died, they were little kids. they were elders, they were laughters, they were cries, they were stories, they were all of that was present in the room on the third day, because everything is welcomed. So when you say how the grief, I don't know how the grief does that. There is something about grief involving all of it, and then you're weeping of this lost life. As Martin Prechtel, who is one of the shamans from Mayan Tutuhilu village, says, the grief and the praise, there are the two sides of the same coin. Apparently, in the Tutuhil language, it says that they sleep in the same bed. The more you connect with the depth of grief, just like you're talking about the depth of trauma, the more stronger you are, the more alive you are, the more connected you are. The more we contemplate on death, the more we appreciate life.
Well, I can't imagine of where to go from here, because you just beautifully tied all the pieces together in such a perfect way, in really not only showing how grief is connected to life and love, but also this um, distinction where we don't see things in a duality, but we really see things as a whole, and understand that life and death are not separate from one another. So thank you. I'm so grateful that we were able to share some time together and to hear you passionately and enthusiastically and joyfully speak about all the work that you do and all that you have to offer. And I really hope that people are inspired by your words and are able to find the resources they need to really walk the path to live and die fearlessly.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Dito, it's very, very lovely to see you. I know the depth of your practice and presence in this world and your beautiful lineage. So I feel a lot of gratitude to you as well.
Thank you.